Have you come across or experienced notes like coal tar, brine, seaweed, band-aid, bacon fat to describe flavors of a whiskey? Well, these are the signature notes that you get in a peated whiskey. What exactly is peat and how do these flavors get into your whiskey? Peat is something like Marmite. It can be quite antagonizing. Just like Marmite, you either like it or hate it. Same with peat or peated whiskeys. People either like them or they hate them. Peat is nothing but a young sibling of coal. If you leave peat for over thousands of years, it will turn into coal. Peat is made from decomposed plant matter that remains under the Earth's surface for thousands of years. An equation for peat would read something like this: flora plus death and water minus oxygen multiplied by pressure and time. So peat is decomposed remains of grasses, moss and reeds that have been compressed over centuries in oxygen-starved, waterlogged conditions. Peat is not a new discovery. In fact, peat has been known to mankind for centuries in countries like Scotland and other parts of the world where peat is available in abundance. Peat has been used as a primary source of fuel for heating and cooking. So for peat to develop, you need three things: abundant rainfall, cold atmosphere, and poor drainage. So how does peat contribute or add to the flavors of a whiskey? Well, for that, I need to tell you about the whiskey making process. So peat in the whiskey making process is used only at one stage, that is kilning. Kilning is basically the process where the malted barley is spread out over a perforated floor, and beneath the perforated floor is the kiln. Kiln is, you can think of it as a furnace where peat bogs are thrown on top of a burning fire to generate a lot of smoke. The malted barley, which is moist, absorbs the smoke during this stage, and that is where the peated flavors sort of enter into the whiskey or your whiskey, and they remain throughout until the distillation, maturation, and eventual bottling. So once again, peat during the whiskey making process is only used while kilning. And a biggest myth that a lot of people sort of buy into or believe: peated flavors never come from water. Water has no role in imparting peated flavors to your whiskey. So, do all peated whiskeys come from Islay? Absolutely not. For example, this Highland Park comes from one of the northernmost islands in Scotland, the Orkney Islands. Again, the Balvenie. It's a classic Speyside distillery renowned to make some very floral, fruity drams. However, Balvenie also makes some peated expressions. For example, this Week of Peat. Penriac, one of our favorite distilleries and another Speysider that also makes smoky or peated whiskies. Talisker, renowned for its seaweed and peppery notes, it has a cult following, but again, it doesn't come from Islay. So, are all Islay whiskies peated? Absolutely not. There are distilleries such as Bruichladdich and Bunnahabhain that also make unpeated whiskies. So, do all peated whiskies come from Scotland? Hell no. While Islay in Scotland is mecca for all peat heads, there are peated whiskies that are made across the world. For example, Sweden, India, Japan, Taiwan, Canada, across the world, right? The only difference here is that in certain countries, peat is available in abundance. For example, Sweden, Canada, or even Australia for that matter. However, countries like Japan and India don't have access to peat. So in that case, distilleries from Japan and India import peat or peated malt from Scotland. Do all peated whiskies taste the same? Absolutely not. In fact, peat is one of the very few elements in whiskey making or in the whiskey making process where one could talk about terroir. So revisiting peat, peat is nothing but decomposed and decayed plant matter, right? And we all know the flora is not the same across the world. It varies. Hence, peat from not only different regions of Scotland, but different parts of the world will be very different, right? Because of that, you will not get the same flavors from the peat in your whiskey. So for example, the peat used by Highland Park imparts a lot of heathery or floral notes to the whiskey. And why is that? Because heather is in abundance in the Scottish Highlands. And if we compare that to the peat or the peaty flavors from the Islay whiskies? Well, Islay whiskies will have a lot of iodine or briny notes to it, right? That's again because of the proximity to the sea. The vegetation in Islay is very different from the vegetation that you get in the Highlands. And even when it comes to Islay, not all peated whiskies from Islay will have the similar taste profile. In fact, not all peated whiskies from Islay will taste the same. The eventual flavor of the whiskey is influenced also by the distillation process, the size of the stills, maturation, the barrels that are used, fill, second fill. So no, it's not just the peat that determines the flavor of a whiskey, even if it's from Islay. For example, if I were to look at these two whiskies from their respective distillery, these two whiskies, Ardbeg Supernova, the peatiest release from Ardbeg Distillery, Octomore, the peatiest release from the Bruichladdich Distillery. Even though these two whiskies crank up the peatiness, the flavor profile on these is very different from each other. So even when it comes to peated whiskies from Islay, or for that matter, peated whiskies from the same distilleries in Islay, they will not have the same flavor profile. For example, this Port Charlotte and Octomore, both are made at the same Bruichladdich Distillery, which by the way also makes unpeated whiskies. But coming back to these two, they don't have the same flavor profile because both of them go through a very different malting process and a maturation process, which affects the eventual flavor profile of the whiskies from Islay or from the Bruichladdich Distillery. And how can a conversation about peat or peated whiskies be complete without the mention of word ppm? So what is ppm? ppm, or parts per million, is the measurement used to determine the phenol content of the malted barley after kilning and before it is used in rest of the whiskey making process. Hence, it's best that ppm is used as a guide rather than a definitive analysis of how peaty your whiskey is. Now that you know all about peat, can a whiskey be smoky or have smoky flavors without the use of peat? Well, yes. For example, this Jack Daniel Sinatra Select has smoky flavors or note without the use of peat. And how is that possible, right? You must be thinking. So when it comes to Scotch whiskies, you will get smoky flavors from whiskies typically that have been matured in ex-bourbon casks. Another way where a whiskey can have the smokiness as well as peatiness without the use of peat is where the whiskey has been matured or finished in barrels that previously held peated whiskey. And one of the best examples for this is, well, now it has been discontinued, is the Glenlivet Nadura peated finish. So now, next time when you're ordering for a whiskey or having a whiskey, don't get confused by the smoky or the peaty flavors on the whiskey. A whiskey can always be smoky without being peated. So now that you are a bit more familiar with peat and flavors that peat imparts, these are the peated whiskies that you should try from Islay. Ardbeg 10-year-old, Lagavulin 16, Kilchoman Marker Bay, Octomore from the Bruichladdich Distillery, Lefroy 18, Bowmore 18, and if you can get your hands on the Ardbeg Supernova, grab it. And now the non-Islay distilleries that make some fabulous peated whiskies: Highland Park, Cuboken from the Tomatine Distillery, Penromac, Benriach, Talisker, Springbank, and Lacheg. So now that you have all the information about peat and peated whiskies, do let us know your favorite peated whiskies and don't forget to like and subscribe. Cheers!